back from the dead.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're all invited to go fucking mental on this motherfucking drop. The countdown has just begun. Are you ready? Let's go, 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 go.
Now we're back from the dead. We're back from the dead.
Hell yeah.
Back. We're back from the dead.
Are you ready? Let's go, 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 go. Back from the dead.
We're back from the dead.
Anything resembles this. Maybe the Gelfand match comes closest, but we managed one pair of decisive results at least. Well, Magnus has been dabbling in knight c6 this year, so it was in the air, and the Rosalimo, what can I say about a move 3? It's there. If you have studied it, you can play it. It is very strange. This should have been routine for Magnus. Magnus, his own hero himself from 5 years ago, would have probably won this fairly easily. Well, what can I say? It was one of the great misses of the thing, because what is really striking is that his play up till this point had been exemplary. I mean, he played at a really high level. Everyone praised him. All these moves, knight f8, knight g6, sack the pawn on f6, play bishop f6, all these ideas were so, at least not trivial to find, but he played all the great stuff, and then after queen h5, there were so many wins. I'll only, put one caveat in this, that it's very easy to sit at home and say this is how you should have done it. God knows I have spoilt many winning positions as well, so it's not my aim to make light of this, but it's a missed opportunity. There's no way of getting around that. If he had won this game, the impression of someone simply crushing his opponent would be hard to get past, because Magnus, again, with black, outplayed Fabiano so easily, and then had he won the point, well, then Fabiano would have to start chasing him in every game, so that opens up a lot more space. It's a miss. Well, it's good opening work. I mean, this is one of the things that's supposed to happen in matches, that you can go very deep, and because you have so much time, you can really go deep and clean some stuff and play even not the most fashionable move with the next one. So I don't think it was one game stuff. I think he probably intended to repeat it again had Magnus gone rook d1. I guess knight b6 and bishop e7 is still leading if you look at total number of games, but I wouldn't say bishop c5 is completely taking over, but if you see, last year I played against Fabiano in St. Louis this position. Then there was this famous Dubov-Karyakin discussion here, and so it kind of flared up, and then it dropped out of off the radar for a while. But after this match, I guess it's just going to be one of the main lines. It's well known, and the theme is well known. So not only this game, but also Fischer-Spassky where takes b4. But this b4 as well was played in some games. There's some game of Van Velde and this and that. I would expect that both sides, well, obviously Fabiano, but because he must have prepared it for this, but it's obvious that Magnus knew it as well. I think one of the things that's happened is that people expect less. I mean, you try to play these unusual moves to get a game, but even these unusual moves you can analyze with a computer or something. There are cases where you play lines that are harmless, but your opponent doesn't, if he doesn't know it on that day, you get something. But I guess Fabiano's preparation as black has been thorough, but we don't really know because Magnus has probed very little. I think he's just probed the surface, whereas conversely on the other side, because Fabiano has stuck to one thing and he's kept on chipping away, we now know that Magnus's Rossolimo preparation was very good, and that his Sveshnikov preparation in this knight d5 line gives the impression of being slightly more improvised. Of course they knew something, but I don't know if they probed it as deeply as this one. I predicted for this match, and I hoped for this match, that there would be very little probing. Because I thought that both of them would in fact take the fight to each other with both colors. I expected more wandering around because both of them are capable of playing multiple openings. But in fact, Fabiano stuck to e4 in one thing, and Magnus has stuck to the Sveshnikov the whole 6 games. I expected that Magnus might even dabble in 2 or 3, so just goes to show I got it completely wrong. And but it's made the Sveshnikov discussion very interesting. Suddenly we have discovered a new position is much richer than we thought, and let's see what tournament practice tells us. On the other side, I think Fabiano has chose the most solid openings. He seems to have decided on Petrov, and Queen's Gambit declined, and I think his idea was to give very little space to Magnus. This is a strategy that I used I tried to use as well, Sergei as well. So, and it's a reasonable strategy because when you play a world championship, your opponent's preparation is going to be quite good. So you want lines that will withstand a lot of scrutiny. So that's the concept. But then Magnus, I think, several times just didn't even want to seem to try with white. In fact, the funny thing is, I think Magnus has been looking for a fight much more with black. Fabiano has been looking for the same fight much more with white, and so this has meant that 6 games are quite interesting, whereas the other 6, frankly, haven't been anything to watch. I haven't even bothered looking at them much afterwards. I mean, just checked the openings for the exact details and moved on. Obviously not. The funny thing, I haven't even delved into it entirely, but it seems that this is not a forced win to begin with, which means that white could have used his bishop to corral the knight in some other way. I mean, I saw Swidler's recap of this ending, and still I've forgotten all the details. And the thing is, Swidler did the recap of the ending, and even he kept on saying, I have to check my notes and check the corresponding squares. It's a very difficult ending. But I think I understand the position after knight g1 pretty well now. I more or less concur with everyone else who said that if it had been given to them as a puzzle, as a black to play and win, then they might have solved it by elimination, but there's no other way. There is no way to know that this position is significant and the position of 2 moves ago is not. Not a single human being knew that till the computer pointed it out. So why? White has just played knight d2, so why should it give an advantage? It's interesting that this knight d2 b3 plans are most effective when the black queen stays on a5, But it's an interesting idea that after knight d2 you can just go back and say, well, what is your knight doing on d2? And I've stopped trying to understand chess by that logic because the computer keeps on pointing out the exceptions. I remember for a while my second would suggest a line, and I would tell him by something, I would say, this position has been played 100 times already with white having an extra tempo. So how can this position make sense? So this is the Sicilian with reverse colors. In English is the Sicilian with reverse colors. White just has an extra move. Chess doesn't seem to lend itself to that sort of logic. If you can make use of the extra tempo, good for you. But more often than not, you just study the new position on its own merit. And I think queen d8. Well, if it works, it works. That was always a joke in our team. I think now it very firmly is. Already, the fact that Kramnik played knight d5 in the Olympiad, he did it, and that's usually a good sign that line is worth revisiting. Having said that, I never really played anyone who played it, so I didn't get too much into this, but given that Magnus was going to play the Sveshnikov and was going to play the Sveshnikov the whole match, I think there was an argument for spending more time here, but this logic can take you anywhere. You can always say you should have spent more time here, and then if they play something else, then the criticism moves on. So we might still see some more Sveshnikov, so in the tie breaks, let's see. c5, rook d1, none of these moves strikes me as particularly difficult. They are fairly obvious moves. And rook a1, rook fe1, I always say a beginner could play it without understanding why, and a computer can play it by seeing the mate. And I think here it's no longer enough to make the natural move and say, a rook behind a passed pawn on d5 with the possibility of knight c4 and pressing on d6, rook d1, rook e1, all these moves. What was really amazing was these lines where the computer would go h4, h6, g4, kick the bishop to h7, and then play rook e1, rook e6, and black is helpless. Despite the fact that it has a protected pass pawn on f4 and thing, that kind of domination, if you see all that, then it's thing. But frankly, for players of Caruana and Kарлsen's level, to make these moves with the hand is trivial. The devil is always in the details. Caruana must have seen queen h5 and rook fe1, but he might have had two things. One is there might have been some little move that bothered him and he couldn't work it out. Again, once you've seen the computer line g4, rook f1, everything looks logical, but it's not logical before. And it's not obvious before. In many of these moves, if there's a tactical stroke where black simply wins in one move because you've opened your king, that will seem obvious as well once it's shown. So it's a miss, but not a trivial one. And the computer's insight is actually fascinating if you see the whole line, the concept, but not the individual moves. Having said that, I would say this queen h5 pirouette was maybe a bit of a miss. Even if you see the evaluation, if someone would tell me at the board 1 point plus 1.9, I would start seeing all the moves that I rejected before I would look again, and I think at the board it's much harder, and this is what it shows. I actually agree with Fabi's logic. I think the computer evaluation is much too high. It's not +1 or something, or plus 0.7. It's much too high. What it is, it's a lasting advantage which is unpleasant. But it's nowhere near winning. Even if black would, first of all, if black swaps 4 rooks, I think white's advantage is very small. If white had kept one pair of rooks and played h5 at the right moment, it's torture, but I don't see bishop f3. I understand at least Fabi's logic. His logic is, I want to end this now. We'll get to opposite colored bishops. Then after that, the nature of the position won't change. It's going to be opposite colored bishops till the end. White has. What really surprised me was Magnus playing h5. My first reaction when I saw it was, doesn't gh5 work? Well, how do you stop h4? That move happened to be obvious for me, but nonetheless, it's just premature. You should have rook h1 ready or queen c4 ready or something. He seems to have just missed f5, right? That's what he said. Yes. And that fizzled out. I don't think, again, he spoiled a big advantage. I think he spoiled a long-lasting one. Yes. Yeah. But again, this is the Magnus of myth already, that this position he'll never spoil this. I think It's almost like a kind of brand of his that he cannot spoil this position, but apparently he does. Strange. These kinds of positions he normally massages much nicer. No, I mean, you have pawns on e4 and f4, you have chances of attack. The question is, are they any good? So there was this moment when he could simply have played bishop takes b5.
Yes.
Again, and I mentioned this on the show, that Maurice asked me the question, like, bishop b5, the computer is screaming advantage for white, do you agree? After that, I could no longer answer the question in an intelligent way, because of course I agree. Once I know that the computer says it's good, I understand why it's good. But if the computer said it's bad, I would have just spent a few minutes trying to understand why it's bad. And this is the problem always when trying to understand a game, when you have that crucial nugget of information. It's all you need to know, is this good or bad? And I mentioned my game with Aronian. All I knew is that I'm supposed to be better here. I could not remember a thing otherwise. But that was enough for me to find everything. Because at every position, you have any doubts, you can tell yourself, no, this is supposed to be good, therefore a move must exist. And that's very different from going to a position saying, I don't know how this is going to turn out. It turned out that even after bishop b5, this plan with rook f6, bishop f5, rook h6, g6 was trickier than it looked. So there are some problems for white to solve, but he does solve them. Once he missed that, I mean, some of the moves were not obvious to me at all, even now, because the computer was chasing the rook. It was going bishop c3, kicking the rook to a4, kicking the rook again with bishop d7, I don't remember, and then going to e5. And that sort of stuff is normally not easy for us to understand. But an amazing game. I don't think either side was lost at any moment. It felt dangerous and practically dangerous. But that's the interesting thing in this match, that very often I think both sides have ended up in positions where it looks to me, or my opinion would be, I could lose this as white and I could lose this as black in a practical game. Both sides are difficult to play, and there are days I will lose with this color and there are days I would lose with that color. And still we got 6 draws. And that's interesting for me, that these positions have been so rich, but somehow neither side has completely fallen apart. So perhaps we have to compliment them for that rather than only criticize the missed opportunities. I was shocked. I mean, black, again, I was not sure how big black's advantage is, because white has a couple of plans. One is knight h3, g5. And for the moment, it's hard to execute b5. With the rook on c2, rook on d1, at least there is some friction. So I only saw this Lamy tweet when he says bishop a4 and b5 is huge. And then I looked at it and thought, yes, it's huge. But I was trying in a more labored way to play bishop d7, rook b8 and try to get b5 more slowly. It's strange for me that Magnus didn't want to even make 3 more moves. He could play bishop d7, even rook a6, rook b8 and b5. Make 3 more moves and then you can still offer this draw. Why offer it here? I try to think of one example, which is sometimes when I'm lost out of the opening and then I'm defending the game for 20, 25 moves, really suffering. And then sometimes my opponent will make a move that not only spoils the advantage but actually puts him and makes him slightly worse, let's say. If he offers me a draw or makes a move where I can simplify and liquidate, essentially you should wipe your head and start thinking, well, now I have an advantage and I can start playing for a win. But sometimes you're not able to cope with the switch. You've been thinking of a draw for so long that you cannot switch. I mean, if he blunders by enough that the advantage is suddenly +1 or +1.5, you might notice and say, well, I'm going to put in the effort. But if it's 0.1, you should still do it. But will you see something that small? If it's 0.3, if it's 0.5, you have to, I'm sorry to use computer evaluation, but anyway, since we're used to that by now. The question is, how big does it have to be before you make the mental switch? But Kарлsen was never lost in this game. He didn't have to switch from, but I think he was fighting this battle in his own head, and that he wanted a draw badly in this game because he was worried he would lose it, and he was not able to switch that thought. So even though he was not lost earlier in the game, he seems to have been very concerned before the game that he might lose it and thing, and so his nerves were not what they used to be. But after making all sorts of possible allowances and there were circumstances and all that, I still am a little bit surprised that Magnus Carlsen offered a draw here. Oh yeah, I missed the exact moment when the draw was offered, and then a bit later I heard them saying, oh, they started discussing the tiebreak, and I was thinking, but Magnus might still win this. And then I saw the result and I thought, draw, what happened? And then I realized that something had happened. I didn't even catch it. Every guy who can more or less play chess, every strong grandmaster said, this draw for what? So I'm hardly the only one criticizing this, but this I can only suggest that he was so worried before the game that, and he's not worried about a position, he's worried that today might end badly. So this is a different level of tension, and of course it comes up in World Championships. And on those days you feel paralyzed, and it seems to have just happened to him.